Professor Helga Nowotny is Professor Emerita of ETH, the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich. And her background is in STS, Science Technology Studies. In the United States, she attended Robert Merton's class in the Sociology of Science, and in 1969, she took her PhD in Sociology with Professor Lazarsfeld. We are very grateful that in the late summer of 2023, we got the opportunity to interview Professor Nowotny in Brussels at the Royal Flemish Academy of Belgium for Science and the Arts. Being mesmerized by doubt and the quest for certainty from a philosophical point of view, we first discussed Professor Nowotny's book, The Cunning of Uncertainty. There seems to be a big contrast with the quest for certainty that has played a very important role in the history of ideas and especially in thinking about science by epistemologists, philosophers of science like Descartes, Hume, all the way up to the Vienna Circle, the philosophers of the Vienna Circle. They wanted science, or they couldn't imagine an alternative to an absolute certain foundation for science. And yet you suggest that we should embrace uncertainty. Yes. What do you mean with that?
Well, let's go back one step to science. I mean, of course, there is this, the quest for certainty of science in terms of foundations. But at the same time, I think everyone working in science realizes that all scientific knowledge is preliminary. It will be replaced because we will know more. We will have better theories, however you define it, more parsimonious. There are many criteria in the philosophy of science to define it. But no question, I mean, progress in science means you will know more and you will have better knowledge in the sense that you understand more, you have theories that englobe other theories, and you have a more comprehensive understanding. And so from this point of view, everyone knows whatever we take to be certain knowledge today is perhaps not certain knowledge tomorrow, because it will be replaced. Nevertheless, foundations, you have to start somewhere. And the foundations, I mean, we have now we have arisen since some time. If you think about quantum physics, there is not so much certainty there in the foundations. It's a different kind of foundation, but it gives us also a different worldview that is much more open and much more uncertain, even in the foundations. And if you think of evolution, evolution is an open-ended, non-theological process. Yeah. So we don't know. And my thinking about the future, and I've worked on the topic of time, as you know, the future remains uncertain, regardless of how many good predictions we have. We are only extrapolating from the past. And for many areas of human behavior, this works well because we are creatures of habit. So we tend to repeat what has worked yesterday, we go on. But then all of a sudden, an event that nobody was anticipating occurs, and our assumptions of yesterday become questionable. Yeah. So this is why I think we have to realize there is uncertainty built in every part of our existence, and the future towards which we move as living beings, we have the arrow of time built into us, going from birth to death. Yeah. So from this point, that's the only certainty we have. Yeah. That's how we are programmed by evolution. And this means coming to understand uncertainty as being part of ourselves. And the cunning of uncertainty was partly based on my years with the European Research Council, where I had the opportunity to see really the best living scientists coming forth with their ideas and getting an ESC grant for it, and how much they enjoyed, moving into the territory of knowledge that is not yet known, that is uncertain, because that's attractive. You want to find out something that no one before has found out, or you want to find a phenomenon that has not been described before, or a compound that has not existed or does not exist in nature, and so on. And from this point of view, I thought, well, scientists working at this very basic science frontier of knowledge, they thrive on the cusp of uncertainty. And if you look at politics or the way how most people live, there's this craving for certainty. Yeah? And particularly in politics, we saw it during the pandemic so many times, politicians wanting to know clear answers, tell us yes or no. But the best any scientist who is honest can say is under certain conditions it's yes, under other conditions it's no, or the probability is so and so much. But this is not what politicians want to hear. Yeah. And then you have people who say, well, why does science not tell us yes or no? And I think it's a misunderstanding of science, and more has to be done to convey to the public and to politicians how science actually works. And there is no certainty.
Yeah,
it's conditions, it's probabilities, and you have to be very careful in specifying the conditions, and you try to do it as well as you can.
That's a hard job, to communicate that.
Yeah, and especially, I have a friend, Gerd Gegerenzer, and he started out teaching medical doctors how to communicate probabilities to their patients, because we are not good at it, and medical doctors are even worse at it. So it's difficult, but nevertheless, and I think statistics should be taught in every school.
Yeah.
To better understand, we live in a world of data, of numbers, of probabilities. We tend to forget, whatever ChatGPT tells us, also it's based on probabilities, extracting from past data. And unless we understand this is part of the way how we should look at the world, we are fooling ourselves.
Yeah. Contemporary epistemologists have exchanged the requirement of absolute certainty for reliability, that is, truth conduciveness. In virtual epistemology, more specifically virtual reliabilism, intellectual character traits like attentiveness, fair-mindedness, open-mindedness, intellectual tenacity, and courage are taken to be intellectual virtues to the extent that they are truth conducive. Perhaps uncertainty can be considered as the overall truth conducive attitude.
My view is, the best we can hope is an approximation of truth.
Yeah?
Which we strive for.
Yeah.
And science is about approximating truth. There's no point in trying to define truth, because also the concept of truth changed in the course of history. What we consider truth and how you can prove that it's truth. But leaving apart this kind of reasoning, if you want to call it truth-inducive, yes. In cosmology now we are resurrecting the idea of multiple universes, of multiple worlds. The data that come back from the James Webb Large Telescope tells us there are anomalies that we can probably no longer ignore or put aside. So there will be a shake-up there, and this means we are in a phase of creative uncertainty. I would put it that way.
Yeah.
You know, it's a creative uncertainty because you discover your previous assumptions, they don't add up. I mean, like Kuhn described in the scientific revolution. They don't add up, so you have to come up with something that makes it fit better. And nobody knows what it is. You know, we have no clue. Does dark matter really exist? We call it dark matter, but it just means we don't know. Yeah. So we have a huge problem, or I would call it a huge opportunity of being creative to make something out of this uncertainty. And I think this is a side that is underestimated also in social life. That people see only uncertainty and it's something you back away from, or people are even afraid. And once you are afraid, you are somewhere in a corner and you don't move out. You become immobile in your head and in your body. And that's the worst situation you are in. But in my book, I mention this in passing. But I think every one of us has lived in our lives through a difficult period where we had to make a decision. And the decision was indeed yes or no, but we did not know what to do. And then you can, like, Darwin's is a famous example, should he get married or not? He listed all the pros and the cons. So situations of that are very important and existential. We don't know what to do. And then you say, well, I let randomness decide. And it relieves you. Because to the best of your knowledge, you don't know what is the better outcome. And you can look at it from many angles and it does not lead you anywhere. Then you say, I let randomness decide.
Yeah.
And it's a relief of your responsibility because you say,
exactly. Yeah.
I have let uncertainty to decide for me. And it's an interesting twist. And so this, and in a sense you can say it's, again, a creative opening because you say, I know option A, I know option B, but there may be an option C that I don't know of. And it's this creativity that springs out of it.
Professor Nowotny is one of the founding members of the ERC, the European Research Council. From February 2010 until December 2013, she served as the president of the ERC. In that context, she helped to set up the evaluation panels of the ERC, which assessed both the creative potential of research proposals and the track records of their applicants.
When you evaluate interesting proposals, there is something that is very difficult to put into words. But I have sat in a number of evaluation committees where everybody agrees this is an interesting proposal. And what usually happens is people agree very quickly, number one and number two are very interesting. They agree on who is out, and the rest of the time you spend endlessly discussing those in the middle. And what makes this consensus arise, that you say these two proposals, there is something fresh in it, something new, something that has potential. You don't quite know what it is, but at the same time you are assured that there is enough solid ground from which it arises. So it's not just randomly you throw out crazy ideas and they may be interesting. So it's this combination. People know what they are talking about, and then they say, there is something that may open up a new perspective. It may give us a different view of how we used to see it. This also holds for the humanities and social sciences, where you don't have breakthroughs in the sense that you have in, medicine or physics, but you switch the perspective, and it makes you realize something that sounded utterly familiar to you, and all of a sudden you understand there's a different perspective. And that's one form of creativity. Yeah. Now, in science, very often, the best ally of working scientists is serendipity. And serendipity is you discover something that you have not been looking for by chance. Uncertainty again. And this is the important second part, you realize its significance. Yeah. You don't just, push it away and say, okay, I've not been looking for it, interesting, and then you move on. But you have this intuition. Yeah. There could be something in it. And this happens again and again. And, some scientists are lucky and they realize the significance. Yeah. And others who see exactly the same phenomena just move on and they don't realize the significance. Yeah. And it's a creative moment that you realize I have to dig deeper. It's like moving in a forest when you look for, mushrooms or what. Yeah. And then you say, do I go right or left or center? And some intuition tells you, move in that direction. It's a search space, and then luck helps you.
Yeah, but also expertise, I guess. I mean,
yes. No, this is why I say. I mean, this is the starting point. It's not a lottery, yeah, where everyone has the same chance in a lottery. Yeah, those who have already a good foundation are the ones, and this is why Pasteur famously said, chance meets the prepared mind. Yeah, and he was right.
Yeah. In 2021, Professor Nowotny published In AI We Trust. 2 years later, the KVAB in Brussels organized an interdisciplinary Thinkers Cycle on the theme AI as an Agent of Change, with Professor Nowotny as international expert. Since the focal point was ChatGPT, we asked Professor Nowotny to assess a fictional ChatGPT-generated interview with her by Professor Harari about In AI We Trust.
Harari asked what inspired you, Helga, to write this book. And according to ChatGPT, I say, of course, it's a pleasure to be here, which is true. And I wrote this book, I'm quoted because I wanted to explore the ethical, social, and political implications. This is far too general to write a book. I wrote the book because I wanted to find out what artificial intelligence does with us and what we do with it. And secondly, I wrote the book because my background is social studies of science. So I'm very interested in the way how science and technology influences society, but also how society selects, takes up, appropriates, or rejects what science and technology have to offer. And in this particular case, I started to delve into the literature. There's lots of it on the market, much of it superficial, with very little historical substance, and I think history is important to understand where we are today. But what I found most problematic was that literature consisted of two parts. One was the tech nerd, optimistic, hype, plenished version. The world will be great. Now we finally have the tool that will help us solve all the problems humanity has. And on the other side, you had the dystopian vision. It will take over our humanity. We will become an appendix to machines, etc. And I thought this is not a good situation to be in. And so I was searching for a middle way. And then I thought, well, let's start with predictive algorithms. Because prediction is, or the wish to know the future, is part of being human. And if you look at various civilizations around the world and the traces we have of what our ancestors did, they all wanted to know what the future will bring. And you have divination, various rituals. I was fascinated with the Chinese oracle boards, which were only discovered very late, around 1890, in a province in China somewhere. And these are the bones of cattle or sheep or tortoise. And there were experts in divination that held them above flames. And then, depending on the cracks, they were telling the ruler the fate. And what I find fascinating is that experts think that this might have been the origin of the Chinese script. And, I like these serendipitous discoveries that maybe divination, the way of wanting to know the future, gave rise to a technology, because writing is a technology that fixes what we write at a certain moment in time. Writing, and this was why it had a huge impact, was confronting you with what was written down at a certain point in time. And you could no longer fudge and, say, well, but, yesterday I said something and nobody could pin you down on it. So I thought, divination is where it all started. And we still want to know what the future brings. And today we have these forecasting reports, most of which you can throw away because the world turned out to be much more unpredictable than we thought, starting with the pandemic. Inflation, geopolitical tensions on the rise, none of which was really on these foresight reports, etc. And now we have predictive algorithms that tell us what the future will be. Now, prediction, especially when it is based on, let's say, mathematical sound basis, is useful, but it is only probabilistic. And we humans tend to forget about, first of all, we are not good with probabilities, and secondly, we tend to forget about it. And if a seemingly objective technology, and many people believe that technology is objective, tells you what is the risk of your future illnesses or what you will do 5 years from now, etc., people start to believe it. And this leads to self-fulfilling prophecies, which means people start to behave in the way what the predictive algorithm tells you. This is the self-fulfilling loop that is built into it. And in the end, it risks that we fall back into a deterministic worldview. It has taken humanity a very long time to get rid of this fixed idea that our ancestors had, that our fate has already been decided by God, the gods, fate, destiny, many names. And all you could do was, you were doing some kind of sacrificial ritual, but basically you were hoping, there's a loophole, it will not really happen, etc. Basically, this is what most of our ancestors believed. And it was only a couple of 100 years ago, with modern science and the Enlightenment, that we realized, there is something we can do ourselves, even if we cannot shape the world only according to our wishes and imagination, but nevertheless we have the possibility. and science that teaches us it's open-ended and the future is uncertain.
Yeah.
And I think this is a very important, let's say, this human discovery that we should treasure a lot. And if we fall back into this deterministic worldview, you know, the machine says, and this is how it is, then we are in bad shape. So this was, you know, one of the messages also that I wanted to get across. And the title, otherwise from what it says here, let me just return to Harari. It says, Harari, my chat, Harari says, that sounds very interesting. Can you give us some examples of the assumptions and the myths you question in your book? And then they have me say, one of them is the idea that AI is something that we can and should trust as if it were a human being. Well, ChatGPT has been deliberately designed to make us believe that we communicate with a human being. So from that point of view, it's correct. But my title, In AI We Trust, is a bit satirical or ironic, if you want, because many people don't realize this is the official motto of the US Federal Bank. Mm-hmm. So the dollar, it's not in God, but in dollar we trust. Yeah. And so I thought, well, it's a play of words with in AI we trust. But what is correct is it's designed in a way that makes us wanting to trust because we trust human beings, at least for a time. But trust is a very special resource, and it's a scarce resource, and it's always something that is given on time. And if the other person does something in human relations that I feel hurt, or I feel insulted, or I feel the trust has been violated, then the trust is gone. And we see this with governments, we see this with institutions, and it's part of the problem we have today, that people no longer trust their politicians, they no longer trust institutions, and it's difficult to get it back.
Yeah. According to Daniel Dennett, we can understand machines and AI better by adopting the intentional stance, that is, by treating them as rational agents with intentions. But arguably, adopting the intentional stance can be dangerous as well.
Using this kind of language is not risky because, you know, these have become familiar objects, and we know it's not a thing, even if we use this kind of anthropomorphic language with it. But when it comes to AI, and especially communicating with an AI, even if at one point it says, I am an AI, you tend to forget it. If it, you know, it simulates empathy, it talks like we talk to each other now. So I forget, you may be an AI, I forget it. And therefore, I treat the AI as though it were a human. And this has risks. And the risks are very great. I have a friend, Anthony Elliott, he wrote a book on algorithmic intimacy. And he looks at these therapeutic AIs that are completely unregulated in the United States. And all the people who have problems, who would like to go to a therapist but cannot afford a therapist, buy an AI and talk with the AI. Now this AI has been trained to get you back on track quickly. So it tells you, you know, just believe in yourself, your problems will go away, which in some cases may be fine, but if you have a real mental problem, and as you know, in Belgium, there was one case of a person who committed suicide. Talking was not the latest generation ChatGPT, but a previous one, who committed suicide by being encouraged by the AI to commit suicide. Yeah? And the amount of damage it does, being completely unregulated. You know, we regulate medicines, side effects, we have clinical trials according to the latest standards. There's nothing for these therapeutic AIs or medical digital apps. And that's very risky because you believe it's a human that wants to help you, and you entrust your most intimate thoughts.
Conversely, Professor Nowotny suggested in a talk, AI may help us to understand ourselves better. That's of course music to the ears of philosophical anthropologists who aim to drive to the heart of the matter of humanity, that is, the core, nature or essence of human beings, independent of their culture, but also in relation to other animals and machines.
You know, I was fascinated talking to a friend who is a mathematician who used GPT-4, so an evolved version of ChatGPT, Generative AI, for solving mathematical problems that he was familiar with. And he said it did extremely well. It made some mistakes, but a good mathematician could make similar mistakes. But, and that's the interesting part, he said the way how it arrives at the solution is different from what a human mathematician would do. And for me, this is an interesting question. First of all, about mathematics as a culturally evolved form of, you know, understanding the world in mathematical terms. You can go back to, there was Chinese ancient mathematics, the Indians had, the Babylonians, etc. And, you know, the mathematics we have today has historically evolved. So it's a cultural evolution. But then the other question relates to how does our brain work compared to how the machine solves the problem. So I find this opens up fascinating new questions. Similar when you think about language. Now we are fed all this, you know, rather bland language that it gives us. What will it do to our language? Will we just say, well, you know, this is crap? It's an open question. I don't have the answer, but something happens to our language, and it will by interacting with our normal language use, something will happen. Maybe, you know, we become more creative, just like, you know, the kids in Brooklyn Heights also are very creative in using their dialect as a creative way of communicating in their world, which is very different of the world that we live in. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's open, and so I think it opens up new, fascinating research questions also, and then there's the question of identity. That is so much, you know, at the forefront of this young generation. It has all these identity. When I was reading Annie Arnaud's, it was one of her books, sort of biography of, and she speaks about the 70s, 1970s, and she said, in those days, have an identity meant you had a piece of card with your picture on it. It meant identity card. It was an official document saying who you are with your picture. Identity had no other meaning. Yeah. So tell this to a youngster today, yes, who are grappling with their identity and interacting with other young people through TikTok and other social media, reshapes their identity and of course adds to the problems they have in defining it. Where will it end? I have no idea, but it's an interesting research question. Yeah. So this is what I mean, you know, it opens up a number of really fascinating questions that we will take up and try to grab, what does it tell us? There is a difference. We know, of course, there's a difference between the machines and us. But, what makes us who we are? And partly it's history, the cultural evolution, the biological evolution, the social community in which we live, with whom we communicate, the means of communication. So I think we are learning more by having this expansion through technology.
Yeah. So, but also in heuristics, in problem-solving strategies.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so, because we are discovering now, the machine uses this. Now, in some instances, you can only say, we can never do what the machine does. Yeah, because it's faster, it can process this enormous amount of data in practically no time. We can never do it. But it may also, trigger some kind of creative response in us. And so from this point of view, I find it offers opportunity that people rarely mention. Opportunities, we say, well, it will give us better diagnostics for types of cancers. It does certainly do this. Drug discovery will be easier. It does it. So there are all these opportunities. But it also gives us opportunities in learning better who we are.
Yeah.
If we are not fooled by it.
Yeah. And if we can suppress our anthropomorphic tendencies.
Yes, and this is why I like one quote by Richard Feynman very much. He had many quotes, but this one is very appropriate for AI. He said, "Science teaches us how not to fool ourselves." Yes. And this is, it's a very wise insight, And if we don't, and modern scientists had this problem not to fool themselves by trusting their senses. Because for them, coming out of the Middle Ages, there were ghosts everywhere. They knew, this is not a ghost. But also, if I see now sparks of electricity, is this really something that I can scientifically explain? Or are these, and what I see, is it just my senses? Is it an optical illusion? So they were grappling with this, not to fool themselves. Yeah. And this is still with us. Let's not fool ourselves.
In Homo Deus, Harari predicts that dataism may push away humanism, and that the next step in evolution may be that the sublime information processing system, constituted by superintelligent algorithms, surpasses Homo sapiens by far. The project of digital humanism is far less pessimistic about humanism in relation to digital technologies.
It tries to bring in humans and make it more human-centered. But especially, there is this manifesto that we wrote in 2019 in Vienna, and we recently, when ChatGPT was released, we wrote a short follow-up. And we especially warned about the dangers of this enormous concentration of economic power in the hands of a few big tech corporations. And in my view, it's not the existential risk of AI wiping out humanity. It's the concentration of economic power now. Mm-hmm. Owning data, having access to algorithms that are not being published. You don't know which data the algorithms are being trained on. All this is private knowledge, and no one obliges the big tech corporations to make it open, which makes it very difficult for the scientific community to keep up, to check what is happening, to alert that there might be alternative ways of going about. And I find it also very telling if you look at the funding pattern. Mm-hmm. Now, if you look at all the statistics, OECD and other statistics, for the spending for research and development, it's always taken together. Research and development, 2/3 of the funding in Europe, in the US, come from private sources. 1/3 is public money, on average. But for AI, it is different. Only 10% of the funding is public funding. 90% come from large corporations and from venture capitalists who invest in these large corporations, but also startups, etc. And this means our university experts don't have access to the computing power they would need. They don't have access to the data they need. They are not able to explore alternatives. And this I consider a very serious problem.
Like AI nowadays, the printing press revolutionized the production and dissemination of knowledge. In her prize-winning biography, Sandra Langeres explains the impact of Erasmus in his combination of adherence to free press with impeccable control and scholarly accuracy. More generally, science had to reinvent itself to deal with the changes caused by the printing press. Similarly, embracing generative AI, scientific research has to reinvent itself again.
We have to raise the bars because just this week there was an article in Nature, in the journal Nature, saying that it was discovered by people who look at what is wrong with scientific papers, where do people cheat in scientific articles. And they say there are a number of cases where the authors use ChatGPT, not really indicating the extent to which they use them. Because you're supposed to tell precisely, I've used a large language model to do this or that to help me in my work, which is legitimate. But like you have to give references in order not to plagiarize, you also have to indicate in these instances I used ChatGPT. And that there are a number of papers, that go under the radar, which is not good for science. So we have to increase the vigilance. We have to increase criteria for quality control. We have to strengthen the ethos of science, that people don't do this. Yeah. So from this point of view, I think it is important. And also, in terms of one of the effects that we see, the ChatGPT as a general purpose technology has, it will wipe out or erode sort of people in the middle. People at the very top are still in a good condition, but they have to become better. People at the bottom are still needed, but they do other things that, and we should pay them better and treat them better, but the middle will be eroded. And so you're raising the bar for the top. Hopefully you raise also the living conditions and fairness for the bottom, but it's the middle that is being squeezed.
In a recent digital humanism discussion about ChatGPT in Vienna, Professor Nowotny predicted that the application of large language models will have huge implications on education as well, from small kids to higher education. Universities, for instance, seem to struggle with providing a place for generative AI.
Well, forbidding is no use. You have to take it up, again as it creates a new space to discuss with your students. You have to rethink the way how you set up an exam. It's not enough to have a simple multiple choice test, or just to let students write what they get from the internet, you know. You have to engage in a... So again, it can and should raise the quality also of our interaction with students and challenge them. Where this will be taken up, I think universities will get a lead, and where not, they will, you know, sink to the bottom. So, you know, I think it's a fantastic new opportunity for the educational system, especially higher education. And the other educational system we were discussing here in the academy, that we will most likely recommend a major campaign for education. How to help teachers in a very concrete sense, you know, how to convey this from university experts to teachers that then can use material to teach their students to be more critical, but also how to make good use that helps them in their future.
Many cordial thanks to Professor Helga Nowotny, as well as to the Thinkers Program of the Royal Flemish Academy of Belgium for Science and the Arts in Brussels, for giving us this interview opportunity. And we eagerly look forward to the future developments, not only in respect of technology, but also in respect of philosophy, and more specifically, digital humanism.